introducing ourselves and who we are. My name is Marcia Fulton, and I'm the co-director of the Extreme History Project, along with my partner in crime, Crystal Alegria, who's passing out our handouts. And we're also really excited and lucky to have our dear friend, the photographer and filmmaker who did many of these videos, and rock star. Adam Sings in the Timber. He happens to be here in Missoula, so we asked him to join us, and he generously gave up his time this morning to come and sort of share his experience as we unfold this amazing opportunity we've had to do these oral histories. And we're so excited to share this project with you and share some of these clips of these amazing interviews that we were able to receive and were gifted from some extraordinary people. So our presentation is really about this project, this oral history project. We are not experts in this field at all. We certainly do not want to put ourselves out as it. We jumped into the fire and we did it, and we learned so much from the experience, and we're learning more now as we've done it, and we're looking at it and thinking about it. So that's kind of how we're going to present it to you. We're going to share with you what we did, how it went, sort of our process. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the theory and the ways to work with these oral histories. They're not as straightforward as you might think, and they're surprising, and they're messy, and they're engaging, and they're thrilling. And to try to figure out how to work with them and put them in their proper place is really important. Plus, the other piece of this that Crystal and I have come to, and we'll get to this too as we go through this, is that we were gifted with these oral histories. We were gifted, and we were tasked with the responsibility of ensuring that these stories made it out to the globe, to the world, and with respect and with honor, and to make sure their voices are heard. It's so clear when you see the clips exactly what we're talking about. So with that, we're going to jump right in. And I'm going to tell you first a little bit about who we are and what we're doing, and a little bit about how we got into this project. Extreme History is an organization Crystal and I started because of working on the Fort Parker research. We've been compiling the history of Fort Parker, which is the site of the first Crow Indian Agency. It was built in 1869. It's just outside of Livingston, Montana. And we've been working on compiling this history, looking in documents, looking in archives, just kind of taking little pieces, bits and pieces here, because no one's ever told this story. And it exists in sentences and in paragraphs and in photographs in a variety of different places and sources. And so as we started to work on this, and it was just sort of an offhand project, sort of a part-time project that Crystal and I were kind of just doing together, we really realized that the story that this place had to tell, this place of shared history, had incredible importance for the world today. It had incredible importance for the reservation people, and it had importance for tribal people. It had importance for all of us in learning how to live together and live in unity and peace, to understand these processes, these forces of history that created this place and other places like it. And we realized that history has a really important role to play today. And that's how we created Extreme History. We call it Extreme History because we don't look at history from an academic standpoint, from a nostalgic standpoint. We believe history really has important social impact. And to understand the processes and forces that get us to where we are today can really help validate, give voice to, and understand all of the different people who played a part in our role in our history. And it helps us look at the future in a different way. So we have a really strong agenda in the work that we do, and it's really important to understand that that's kind of where we came from. So we started working with the Fort Parker material, and that's where this oral history project kind of came out of. Fort Parker was built in 1869. There's a photograph of the fort. The only photograph we have extant of the fort that was taken by William Henry Jackson. It came out of the Treaty of Laramie of 1868, which provided for an agency with a warehouse and a place to distribute the annual goods that were given to the Crow in exchange for a massive amount of land that they gave up to the government. And we've got some photos of some of the Crow chiefs that were very significant on the landscape at that time, and a photo of that Fort Laramie Treaty, just to kind of give you some visuals of the folks that we're going to be talking about a little bit. So we dug into the archives first. We were very aware of our role and our Strikes the Gun, who you may know are the great-great-grandparents of Shane Doyle, a very prominent educator and part of Indian for All, and a board member and a dear friend of ours. So we started doing all of this work, and we knew that there was another story to be told. So I turn over to Crystal, and she's going to share this part of the story.
I just wanted to also welcome everybody here today and say thanks for coming and hearing our story and then taking these oral histories and passing them on. But we did a lot of work in the archives, but we had the opportunity to do some archaeology. And we did some archaeology along with the Montana Department of Transportation, who was a big part of this oral history project. So this oral history project, just to go back just a little bit, was funded by the Montana Department of Transportation and an organization called Project Archaeology that I also work with, and then the Extreme History Project that I also work with. So, there was 3 organizations that kind of came in to support in the initial stages these oral histories, and then the Humanities Montana came in on the second round of oral histories to fund those. So I just wanted to get that in there. But as Marcia said, Fort Parker was established in 1869. I hope I'm not losing my voice. I know.
I'll have to do it.
I know. Was established in 1869, and it's located about 10 miles east of Livingston. And so in 1875, they moved that agency to current-day Absaroka, Montana, in that area by Columbus there. And so they moved that agency for a lot of different reasons, but it was moved. And so this is an illustration of that second agency building that is no longer there, but was there built in 1875. They stayed at the second agency from 1875 to 1884 when they moved to current Crow Agency. And we have current Crow Agency today near Billings. So that's kind of the progression of these agencies. But when we do our research and when we did our oral histories, we really focused on Fort Parker and the second agency. So you'll kind of be hearing about both of these places. This is a photograph of the ruins of the adobe ruins of the second agency. I think this photograph was taken in the early 1900s. So a lot of the local ranchers and farmers scavenged these materials, and of course you don't see anything there today. But we had the opportunity in a couple summers ago in 2011, the Montana Department of Transportation was going to realign the road that was going right through the middle of this agency, where this agency used to be. And so we had the opportunity to do some archaeology out there, and we brought some volunteers out to do some archaeology with us. And they were both native and non-native volunteers who came to be a part of this project for 2 days. And so here's just some photos of those 2 volunteer days. And it was at these volunteer days that, because we had a lot of folks come out, we had Rabbit Nosegun, who you'll see in just a few minutes. He's a Crow tribal member, and he came out that day, and he talked about some stories of these places. He talked about stories of Fort Parker. He's talked about stories, some oral tradition of the second agency. And some other folks that came out were telling some of these stories. And we just started to realize there's there's still a huge amount of oral tradition surrounding these 2 places. And so then also with this Montana Department of Transportation project, they brought out some Crow elders to the site. They brought out the 107th committee to the site just to have them come to this place and see what they were doing, just to bless this archaeology that was happening and to make sure that they were doing it appropriately. And so at that time, you'll see the picture up in the top left corner of the day at the second agency when those elders came out. And this was the Crow tribal elders coming out to the site. And when they were out at the site, there was all these, they were talking a lot about what happened at this place, and they were talking a lot about the stories that their grandparents had told them about this place. And we had been doing all this research in the archives, and when we heard this, our shift just completely changed on that day. we said, you know, we can do all this archival research and we can get all these numbers and dates and everything, but these are the stories that are important. These are what we should be doing.
We also had the elders come out to Fort Parker the year after they had done the second agency. And this photo down here was an extraordinary opportunity for us. These women came out and sat and walked the site and sat by the river by Mission Creek, and they told stories to each other in Crow. And to hear the Crow language at Fort Parker was so moving for us, just to have that opportunity to be there and participate. And I was very blessed and lucky that one of the granddaughters here translated what they were saying to me in English, so I could hear the richness of these stories as they shared the stories of how their great-grandmothers tanned the hides by the creek and the types of stones and rocks they looked for to do that. It was incredibly powerful and moving. And as Crystal said, we realized very early on that these stories, as they were starting to percolate to the surface, there was so much more to tell to this story than what we were finding in the documents, and that oral histories were going to give us a very richer experience to add to that documented stories. So you might recognize that handsome dude. So we sat down and we figured out a formal oral history project. We approached Montana Department of Transportation to see if they would be willing to fund us so that to work it within the second agency excavation project, and we were granted a grant from them, and we were grateful to that. Extreme History was in its early stages. We didn't have our 501c3 yet, so we were grateful for Project Archaeology to hold the grant for us while we did that. We have since made our way through that process, and we are fully 501c3 now, which is exciting. But we were grateful to have Project Archaeology as a partner on this project. So we sat down and we kind of figured out ourselves how we were going to approach this and what this process was going to do. So first of all, we needed to formulate the research questions. You know, we're archaeologists, we don't approach anything without a research question, and we wanted to know about these, what stories remain within the cultural memory of these places. It was really important to have those stories documented. So that was sort of our big question going in. We began to inquire with our Crow friends and other people that we knew who might have these stories. We've already had a few people come forward to tell some of these stories, and we eventually were able to compile a list of names of folks that we felt we could contact and would be part of this process. And then we began the process of contacting. We first of all sent out a letter that detailed very thoroughly what this process was going to be, what we were looking for, what their responsibilities were, as well as a release form that we wanted everyone to sign that made sure that they understood they retained ownership of what they were telling us, but they were giving us permission to make these stories public and to make use of them for educational purposes and the ways that we were going to do that. So that was part of this packet that we sent to everybody. We mailed that out, and then about a week and a half or 2 weeks later, we began the process of contacting them. And that was a challenge for us. We didn't realize that in some cases, particularly with some of the elder men, to be a white woman contacting a Crow elder male was not necessarily an acceptable form of doing that. We had to find some ways of getting around that. Luckily, we had a large network of folks that were able to help facilitate that. We were able to get a group of people who were willing to participate. So we arranged to make those, to do this interview. We found places in Crow Agency and in Billings to actually film the interviews. We arranged for a fabulous filmmaker to come and be a part of that, to do the filming for us, and put all that together. Then we traveled down. We traveled down to Little Bighorn College, which was our first port of call in this process, and Adam got all of his equipment set up, and we were all ready to go, and we were waiting for our first interview to show up, and none of us knew what to expect. We didn't know if anyone was going to show up or not, and what was going to go on, and we waited, and eventually we got a little panicked because it was about 30, 40 minutes late, and we called our dear friend Tim McCleary, who's been a consultant advisor on this project, and we said, Marvin hasn't shown up yet. He's like, I'll go get him. So Tim went out, found Marvin, brought him in. He said he was on his way. He was just moving a little slow that morning. And Marvin was our first interview, and from there, they just went like clockwork. Our next interview came in, then we went and did 2 the next day, 3 the next day in Billings. So it really worked out. It each interview, as the interviewee, the participant came in, we started the conversation before we started filming. We wanted to make them feel relaxed. We wanted them to kind of get in the frame of mind. So we sort of started asking questions. In Marvin's case, for instance, he brought in some photographs and some documents that he was sharing with us. So that kind of worked well as Adam was getting all the lighting ready and the camera set. And then it kind of made it really easy for them to kind of sit down and sort of continue the conversation. So that was sort of the preparation. Then we asked our questions, and in many cases we only asked one. And 2 hours later we're still filming, and it was amazing the sort of stream of consciousness that came off in many cases of these participants as they shared these incredible stories with them. We recorded it audibly, we also recorded it digitally, and we also we took copious notes, and then we eventually transcribed them. It was really important through this process for us to offer some sort of thanks and gratitude to these people because they were sharing something so personal, so intimate, and so important to their culture. And we wanted to ensure that we were giving them something back. So we prepared gifts to give them, and Crystal will talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Then that was the end of the interview process. We finished the final interview. We did it. They were done. They were great. They were amazing. I think we were all changed by that experience. We all talked about it at, I remember, at Kevin's house after we finished those last interviews, and we were just, all three of us were just sort of blown away, just kind of processing what we had just experienced, and it was truly amazing. Then we went through the process of transcribing these lengthy interviews, most of them 2 hours long. And it was quite a task, and still is a task. We're still in the process. We're not quite to completion yet, so we're still in the final processes of getting those transcriptions done so that we can put them out to the public. Once the transcriptions are done, we will be formatting them into a standardized form so that it will be easy for people to work with and to search. They will be available in a variety of different formats, audio, DVD, Word documents, digital documents, so that you can search a document as well as hard copies, so that people can work with them in any way that they want to. And then the final piece of this is to distribute these. These are intended to be public documents, and they're going to go to 5 different institutions in Montana. They'll go to the Plenty-Coup Museum in State Park, the Little Bighorn College, the Western Heritage Center in Billings, MSU Bozeman, and the Montana Historical Society. All of the full, complete interviews will also be available online on YouTube through our website. We're trying to compile a digital database of all of our research to make that all fully available to the public. We want people to have full and complete access to these stories because they're amazing and they're transforming. So we're going to give you a little taste of what we experienced that first day, and then we'll talk about it. The internet will come up.
While we're waiting for that to load, I passed out a resources page for everybody. Did anyone not get one? I have a couple left. And then I'm also passed around a sign-in sheet, so if you can sign in on that. At some point, you could find, if you can, I don't know where the sign-in sheet is now, but here I'll pass it around. Anyone not sign in? Give it to you, and then you can just pass it back to the back there. You know, this worked like a charm when we did it earlier this morning. We haven't done it.
If you reload, Marcia, maybe refresh it.
Here it comes.
In the 1868 treaties, my grandmother, Sarah Hines, her Indian name is 1868 treaties. My grandmother, Sarah Hines, her Indian name is a round tobacco bundle. Her grandfather, Wolf Bowl, was at the treaty, went to the treaty, and he asked for a schoolhouse. He wanted his children to go to school. So when they moved there and a schoolhouse was built, nobody wanted to send their children to school. And then he had three wives. And the youngest kills three men, and that's my great grandmother. And I forget the other two wives' names. And so he heard it. He led his kids to the schoolhouse, and they were the first ones to go to school there. And he would sit in front of the schoolhouse to make sure that they were not interrupted, and acted like a security at that time. And when he did this, he fell asleep, and he heard a song, and he used it as in the tobacco soaking ceremony. And that song has been passed on in my family, and my grandmother was the last to have it, and she gave it to me. And probably for that reason, I was the first one to get a college education.
We immediately knew we were onto something very different than what we expected. We went in wanting to know more about Fort Parker. We wanted to fill out this history. We wanted to take that history and put it into a book and a documentary that we're working on. And it became immediately apparent that these oral histories weren't for us. These oral histories were for them. And it was incredibly moving to be a part of listening to them as they shared these stories with us. I get emotional thinking about it. And we realized it was a huge paradigm shift. The most significant way to honor a culture and a person or a history is to just listen to them. And that's what they wanted. That's what they shared with us. And when they sat down for 2 hours, oftentimes, and told stories of the most intimate nature, and they got emotional, and they took moments, and they paused, and they breathed, and we realized they were giving us something so important and so intimate. And they were doing it because they needed to express that. They needed to have that voice. We quickly realized that of all the projects, we got a lot of projects going on, these projects, this oral history, was the most important thing we could do. It was the most important work we could do, was to facilitate getting these stories and these voices to the world and to make them heard. And so it was a huge paradigm shift as soon as we started. We're going to share with you a few others so you get a little taste. Marvin Stewart was our first fellow who came and did our interview with us, and he had some really amazing stories to share with us. Hopefully it won't take quite so long to load this time.
Adam, do you want to just share while we're waiting?
Yeah, it's a great opportunity. You want to talk about your experience?
Paradigms. No, it was really rewarding for me. You know, I'm from there. I'm not a historian. I'm a documentarian. You know, I'm at the heart of it. I'm a documentary photojournalist.
Oh, then they found these bulbs over here,
And I'll come back to it.
and they carbon dated that to 34 AD. And 34 years after Christ died. And if you really kind of think about that, and somebody asked him, we had a teleconference there, and somebody asked him who he thought they were, and he says, Coinus. So scientifically, we were fish eaters and we were here before anybody else. And stuff like that, I mean, it's important to me. It's important to me, and like the reason that we lost that riverbed case was they were saying we're not appreciators, and then my Uncle Joe, Medicine Crow, went to school in North Dakota and wrote a thesis of how we came about here. And that story's always been told. And everybody was blaming Joe for losing that water because he said we weren't from here.
Marvin points out one of the issues when we're dealing with oral histories. Oral histories can oftentimes contradict other histories, written histories, more accepted or understood histories. And that's been a big question that Chris and I are working with as we're working with these oral histories, is that there needs to be a place for them. And can we live with a history that's contradictory? Can we live with multiple stories in our history? We haven't up to this point. They've been in the hands of people who've cleaned them up and fixed them in ways and given them a gloss that takes us and makes us think of history in a certain way. But history, as we like to say, isn't pretty. It's very rough and it's jagged. It doesn't always fit really nicely and really comfortably. Marvin shared 3 different stories there that contradict each other. It's been believed for many years that the crows didn't eat fish, and we have oral histories that said they in fact did. They've been passed down within specific family members that showed that. There's stories and connections to burials and dates that date way before it's believed officially the crow actually made their way into the Yellowstone Valley. So there's all kinds of contradictions here, and it's really important to keep that in mind when you're working with oral histories. Adam, you want to finish your statement that you were making as I load the next one?
Yeah, you know, my whole thing, you know, my subject matter is Native Americans, specifically crows. That's what I do. And you know, it's nice to be able to, for me to, I guess, keep our people kind of alive. You know, like I tell our stories. You know, there's a lot of stereotypes about Native Americans out there. And my whole purpose in life is to dispel stereotypes and to show the non-native world that we are still here, that we're thriving, that we're vibrant, and that we have a meaningful way of life. And you know, this is just showing where we came from. You know, that how we got to where we are now and why we are so strong. You know, there's not a lot of us, but we're really strong.
Our next interview is with Rabbit Nose Ben. He's a very dear friend, and he shared, not only did he come to share his story, he came in full regalia because he saw this opportunity as so important and so significant. He wanted to represent his culture in the way that he knew how, and we were all amazed and just so grateful for the opportunity to have him do this interview in his full dress.
Our people that signed, or leaders that signed the 1851 treaty, at that time, our leaders like the Wekualawaja sits in the middle of the land, and some of the other great warriors that signed that treaty were in their own special way, designating a large area which included 38 million acres so that they would be undisturbed and allow those lands to be used exclusively by the Crow Saucan Nation in perpetuity. That's what they believed. And when they put their thumbprints, their fingerprints, as well as their access to these treaties, they thought that was the end of the treaty period. They thought, this is it, this is our lands. They explained it to their people, everyone was celebrating and saying, we will now go forward undisturbed and we can continue to maintain our Crow liveways. And that included the chase, that included going and being free and having all these beautiful horses. The Crows sheep, and they'd hunt for elk. The white bears frequented the area. My great-grandmother, pretty sure, even owned a grizzly bear, which was very small, and it was captured because something happened to the mother bear, and so that little grizzly bear was like an orphan. So pretty sure family took that little bear in, and they raised it for a while, but then the grizzly got so big, so to speak, the bear was so large that they had to release it into the wild. And pretty sure talks about that in her story and in her book. And my aunties were also very blessed to hear her stories about Crow life and how it was before the reservation days of the 1870s. And when 1868 came, previous to that, from 1851 to 1868, period of what, probably 16 or 17 years, our people enjoyed a utopia. And like I said, the other tribes wanted this area too, but our warriors were quite astute and understood how to protect these lands, and they were courageous.
In the middle of Rabbit's interview, he said a prayer in Crow. It was, again, very moving. And after he said this rather lengthy prayer, which we're all working to transcribe, he then translated it into English. And his prayer was for us and the work we were doing, and the importance of what we were doing to get it out to the world, and how important it was to tell these stories. And it was incredibly moving for us to know that, and it just so clearly stamped that importance and significance of these oral histories, and why it's so important as teachers to be able to utilize these and bring them into your classrooms. We've got one more clip that we're going to show. Did you want to say something?
Yep. Well, Marcia's getting that ready. I also wanted to point out that, a lot of these oral histories, we went in asking the question of Fort Parker.
As a kid,
But we got so much more. So we got, we're showing you some of the other parts that we got, the non-Fort Parker parts. They kind of relate to Fort Parker. But Birdie Railbird's interview they're going to see right now really encapsulates that idea of the other things that we were getting that were so critical.
but or as a growing up, I was raised along the Little Horn River right down below here, and I lived on the river. My mom's house was like 1,500 feet away from the river or so, but we rode horses. We jump on the horse, and without it, we were poor. We didn't have saddles. But we'd have reins, and we'd forever be fixing reins. But we'd be at the river all day, and we'd take our food over there, and we'd just swim and just hang out. And then sometimes we'd jump on our horses and ride in the hills, and we'd go way up there towards out towards the east, where all the Custer, the Reno Monument is right above on that side and south, southeast from us, and then we've got other hills, and there's a lake, not a lake, but a pond or something out there that we used to like to go there. We didn't swim in there, but the horses would drink water, and we'd sit around there, and so I grew up there. I grew up along the river, and then in the winter time, when the river froze, we'd sweep the snow and the ice, and we'd skate there and sometimes even at night, how it gets dark early, we'd take our lanterns and we'd skate and skate and skate. And so that's how I grew up. And today, the kids stay in the house all the time. I never see them going out. And I don't know, our horses, we didn't really have corrals or anything like that, but our horses were, I don't know how we just caught them, but they were just by us all the time. Our horse was like a dog. But dogs, puppies, they were there. And we didn't need saddles. And today, we've got to buy saddles for our kids, or my grandkids. So I don't understand that. I mean, and my mom let us, I think the river was her babysitter, because there are so many of us. My dad died when I was 8. He was 42 years old, or 44 years old. And my mom was a widow at 44 with 7 kids. And so she held it together all the way through. And I think that's how we all survived, was that river and the horses. And then there was an apple tree there. So we'd sit on that apple tree and just eat apples. Then the choke cherries would be ripe. We didn't have June berries because June berries are closer to the mountains where it's cooler. But right along that river, right down there, there's plums. We got plums and we've got apples and apple trees. Just one apple tree actually. And then we had rhubarbs. Some Mexican people lived across the road from us and they planted some rhubarbs and they grew every year for a while. And so we just chomp on rhubarbs, buffalo berries. We picked buffalo berries. And so it's like we were pretty healthy. Never ate McDonald's. We didn't have a TV till my mother got a TV when she was crazy about the Kennedys. So when he got assassinated, she bought a TV for that so she can watch the news. So then that was 1962 or something like that. And so we didn't really have a TV. But then after she bought the TV, guess what she did? She covered it with a blanket. And the kids couldn't touch it. I mean, it was something that it was an altar. And today, kids just take the remote and they're just playing, and they're going through and they watch what they want. Back then, we only probably had 2 channels or 1. And it was something that we weren't to touch, so we never really touched it or played with it. But I remember when they turned the radio on, all the adults would be sitting there like this, kind of like listening to it. And we'd be playing, and then I would kind of listen a little bit. I wasn't sure what they were listening to, but I think they were like kind of like soap operas. And they came as a series, so they wanted to catch up with yeah. And so that was where I came from. Then I went to college. It seemed like I was still riding a horse, and the next day I was in college. And it seemed like, life just kind of changes. And I'm sure it was like that for my ancestors too.
Bertie's interview, I think, is so expressive of what oral history does for history. There's no document that can make you feel the way you feel right now. It's that immediate color, that richness, that experience, that human face, that human story, that watching her expression, listening to her voice, watching as her eyes turn up and gaze as she takes a moment to pause and think about what she's saying. No document can give you that richness of history. It's such a beautiful expression. And it doesn't hit you here, it hits you here. And that's where we want everybody to get with these oral histories. Adam, you want to talk a little bit about your experience listening to these stories as a young Crow fella, just kind of what it meant to you to hear some of these?
Yeah. I was born in Billings. I lived on the reservation until I was 4 or 5, and then I lived in Billings until I was 12, and then from there I moved to Wisconsin. So I moved really far away until I haven't been back. I haven't lived in Billings. I lived there a summer 6 years ago when I interned for the Billings Gazette. But other than that, I've lived here in Wisconsin, and it was very nice it was great to listen to these people, and all of them. Most of them, I'd say they knew who I am, but if they didn't know who I was, they knew who my grandpa was, and they would all tell stories about my grandpa, who we eventually interviewed, and that was great. I get to hear about my family from these people, and I think some of them were distant relations, so it was really, it was like coming home a little bit, listening to the voices, listening to them, to their like accents, the way they speak, their dialect, and speaking in Crow. I mean, I go back to Crow all the time. I'm not like a stranger, but going back and hearing it and just listening to them for hours, it was great. It was like when I was a child, and that's all I heard. Before I moved away, or before I knew anything about the world, listening to their voices and the way they spoke and their cadence and their phrases. It was, I'm not a very emotional guy. I don't show emotion, but I can feel it in here. And like picturing where they're at. I know where they're at. It's where I've come from. And it's very rewarding. And I'm there, and I'm recording it, and I'm preserving it for my children, and for my grandchildren, because they're not going to be here for very much longer. Hopefully they'll be here for a long time, but we all go, we all die, but we all have our descendants, and for me, it's important to preserve our life for my descendants, for our descendants. Like the last time we were there, I bought a book that was the life story of my great-grandmother. And it's a thick old book, and the pictures, and like a woman, a non-Indian went, like these ladies, and spoke to her for a few days or a few weeks or something, and kept going back, and then recorded her life. And now it's a book for all of us, all of us to read, all of her descendants to read. And it's just great to just be able to kind of go back and know where you come from and be so connected to it. And for me, it was really, really rewarding, and I'm very thankful that these ladies found me and asked me, and I had the ability to contribute my expertise or knowledge in filmmaking and photography.
Absolutely. We were grateful to have Adam, too, because he did a beautiful job in not only doing the filming, but just being part of the process and helping us through this whole thing. It was a real team effort, and it was great. And Adam is an amazing filmmaker in his own right, but the fact that he's Crow also helped. And we often found, especially with some of the elder men, that they were directing their talking to Adam, which was great for us, because we probably would not have gotten the same responses from them had it just been the two of us. So it was also really beneficial from that standpoint. So we're going to take a moment. Go ahead.
The one thing that we kind of talked about a little bit about at lunch, and that kind of stuck with me is like, why are you two doing it? And like, why are two white ladies doing it? And the simple answer is because we're not doing it. Crows. I'm just going to stick with crows. Maybe other tribes, but they're not as cool as crows, so I won't. But anyway, so we're not doing it, was doing it by himself. And I like to think of it sort of as an evolution. Like they're doing it, but they're also bringing crows in, and so to work with them. And who knows, in a generation or two, it'll just be crows doing it. But they're doing it because, you know, we're not doing it. And maybe it's because we're so right there that we don't think we're ever going to lose it. And so, you know, it's what am I, you know, it's, we're taking it for granted a little bit, like we're taking our elders for granted because they're there. We can talk to them and we see them all the time, but, you know, we don't think to record them.
And it's hard to think about when you're emotionally connected to
Yeah.
people that they're gone. It's a little easier for an outsider to kind of see that in different ways. You don't want to push that button. You don't want to stop and think that, well, this person who I love so much is going to be gone one day.
And it was tough for me to listen to my grandpa. You know, it was rewarding, but it was also hard because, you know, he's almost 80 or in his 80s, and you know, I don't know how much time we'll have with him, but at the same time, and you know, I'm recording him, and I'll be able to go back to that for, you know, when I'm an old man and show my grandchildren, you know, this is where we come from. So.
I want to just take a moment and open it up to you guys. You've seen a little bit of these clips and videos. What are some of your immediate impressions and ideas when you view these? Does anybody want to share their impressions or thoughts just from saying yes?
Well, I just want to thank you for making them because I know they mean a lot to my students too. And many of them are, you know, European or of origin, but there are also in my school here in Missoula the random Blackfeet or Robot or Salish child, and it's really important for all the kids to understand the roots and the history. And I really appreciate being able to access these, so thank you very much.
Oh, great, thank you. And we really want to make these available for all people to make use of, and we encourage you. And we're going to share with you some ideas of how you might be able to do that in the future. And we certainly hope to open a dialogue with you and have opportunities for you to share, if you do work with these oral histories, how you did that, how you work for it. We'll put together an online forum for you all to kind of share ideas and be able to make use of these because they're very important. Does anybody else have any immediate impressions or thoughts as they watch these clips? Anyone want to share anything? Yeah.
I think just the thing that's rolling through my mind is just the idea of getting this stuff on video, and not just, you know, Native American oral history, but getting our kids to think about their own, you know, whether they're Native American or non-Native, to think about their own history, their own contribution to their family or to, you know, their place where they, you know, they live, and to have, you know, maybe do a project of their own family oral history or theirs, and to be able to, you know, look back and.
Absolutely. I was, when my mother turned 80, I was living in New York at the time, and I took her to Grand Central, and we did a StoryCorps interview. It was my gift to her for her 80th birthday. And it was just, again, from my own personal standpoint, to have that opportunity to sit down with my mother and ask her questions that I'd never asked her before, and think about her life as a person as opposed to my mother. It's an amazing opportunity and experience, and I highly encourage everyone to make use of encouraging your students, encouraging yourselves and your siblings to call your parents and get this information on tape in some way, because that is the building block of our history. And if we don't give voice to the person that you have, that voice will never be heard, whether it's your parent, your grandparent, whoever. So those are how we build our knowledge and understanding of history. Somebody else had their hand up back there. Yeah.
Well, I'm second generation, and I'm from Poland and Belgium, but that we had a relative we didn't know we had, he was Canadian, and he got in touch with my mom because he had done real extensive research in Europe, Eastern Europe, and so on, and he had made 2 discs out of it. Actually, they were tapes, and we converted them to discs. And those are the things that I treasure most. You know, I always know where those are, and they're not going to get burned up or flooded out in the fire. Everything else can go, but I mean, that's us.
Exactly.
You know, and our whole family, you know, whoever is still alive has that, so thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Yes. Yes.
Thinking about history, and there are 2 sides to every story, and the conflicting stories, and we know what our textbooks have been source, and the primary source is the journals, the interviews. They speak from experience and personal experience, and that's why it's so important.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. That's a good lead in. I think we're going to move in on that. And first we're going to just finish up our experience, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the bigger picture, some of the theories and the theoretical ideas about working with oral history and the building blocks of history, as you were talking about. But Chris is going to talk a little bit about our gratitude to these people.
So we were at the end of, we've done 2 rounds of oral history. So at the end of each oral history interview, we would give gifts to these, to the interviewees. And in the first round, we gave a blanket, we gave sweetgrass, tobacco, and cash. So we gave 4 gifts because that's the traditional, we've been told that's the traditional number of gifts to give. And so I think that, you know, the gifts that you give are different in each culture and can be different for whatever project you're doing. But I think it's a really important aspect of this project is to give that thanks at the end. And by doing a little bit of research or talking to a few folks, you can find out what those appropriate gifts are. And so the second round, we gave Marcia hand-knitted scarves for everybody. And then we gave them the sweetgrass tobacco and cash as well. And the cash is an important part because it is, they are giving you something of very great value. So you need to give them something of great value in return. And all 4 of those gifts kind of culminate in that value. So here's Bill Yellowtail getting his gift. And you can see look, he didn't expect a gift. So he was really surprised, but it's a great photo, so we drew that in.
It's important to honor the gift that they're giving us and to let them also know how grateful we are for their participation. So it might seem weird that we're asking this question now and not at the beginning, but this is how we approached this project. We did it, and then we said, well, what is this that we just did? So we thought, as we were putting this presentation together, we're like, it doesn't feel right to ask that question at the beginning because we didn't know that question at the beginning. We didn't even ask that question at the beginning. So we're now in the process as we're finishing up all of the transcriptions and we're starting to put together the final product, which by the way will look like this. There's going to be 2 binders that look like this. And it'll have an introduction, it will have an acknowledgments page of everybody who participated. It will have each member who participated will have their own folder. There'll be a printed transcript. There will be the DVD. There will be an audio, another CD that will also contain all of the digital transcriptions and everything with photographs and anything that they brought to the interview will be there. So we're trying to make as much available as possible, but every part of the process is going to be there. So there'll be, and here's some DVDs is what they would look like on the back of each one. So these will be the things that we'll be distributing to those institutions that we talked about. So we started to, after we finished this process, and we're in the process of getting those out there, we had to sort of start to think, because we want to work with this material as well. We're working with PBS Montana to do a documentary, and these are going to be the foundation of that documentary. And so we've been sort of thinking about and talking about how to work with these oral histories, how do they work within the context of the other materials, the documents that we've been studying, and how do we present this in a way that gives equal weight and equal honor to both of those ways of talking about history. And it's a challenge, and we're in the process. So we're opening this dialogue for you to help us, and we'll let you know what we're thinking. And again, we're not presenting ourselves anyway as experts, but we've been doing some reading, and we're going to share with you some of the things we've learned from some amazing books. One by Lynn Abrams on oral history theory, a great book if you're working with oral history to kind of think about what oral history has to offer. And just for teaching history, this amazing book, Historical Thinking and Other Unnatural Acts, just sort of rethinking how we present history, not just in the classroom, but in general. We're a public history organization, so we do public events, and it's very informative for that as well. So we highly recommend those 2 books. And there we go. And so we're going to share with you a little bit about what we are in the process of learning about oral history.
So this is a photograph of course, Grant Voltail during his interview process. And so what we're kind of coming up with now is that, you know, when we went into this, we thought, okay, we go not quite like that. We go in and we did the interview, and the interview itself is a product, and a product isn't quite the right word, but I'm having a hard time finding a different word. It was the part of this itself. And because you're sitting there with a person in a room, and he's talking and giving you this information, and it is, we learn so much during this process. So that's one part of this. Then we go on to the second part, the recorded version of the interview. So that's what we have, what we showed you today. So that's a whole different product. It's a whole different thing, because it's, when you view it in a very different way than we viewed it when Grant was telling us this. I mean, I was crying during Grant's interview in parts. I think, Adam, you cried at one point during your maybe you didn't. Okay, he's not going to mess up to it if you did. But I mean, there's that interaction, and when you view it, you don't feel the same way as we did in that. So it's a whole different viewing. It's a whole different piece of that. So then the written transcript is the third part. We had a whole bunch of volunteers transcribe these interviews, because we just are kind of doing this on the fly, you know. and so all those transcriptionists bring something else to those interviews. They might not put in the ums or the laughter that happens when Bertie's laughing. You know, sometimes we ask them to say put in Bertie's laughing, but you know, maybe that doesn't always make it in. So it's a little bit of a different product. And then the final one, the interpretation, is really interesting as well, because that's bringing in all these different ideas and thoughts into what this is, what this actual piece is. So there's kind of these four different parts to it. And I think that's important when you're doing this with your classrooms, to kind of talk about that, and your students talk about these as four different pieces of this final thing.
We're going to talk a little bit about interpretation, and we're going to talk about some of the things to bear in mind when working with oral histories and watching oral histories and thinking about the stories and who's telling the story and when they're telling the story and where they are when they're telling the story and how removed are they from the story they're telling. There's all kinds of complexities when you're thinking about oral histories. So one of our oral histories, it's sort of we did outside of these funded oral histories, but was a very generous oral history, was by Anita Scheffelbaum. Anita's a descendant of Thomas Kent, who is the agency butcher at Fort Parker, and he was married to a woman known as what she has as well known, came to be known as Mary Kent. Mary and Tom Kent are Anita's great-great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents. And Anita brings all kinds of stuff to this story. She's sharing a story with us that's part of her family's tradition, but Anita's life and her world and her experiences have been very different from what her family's story, the story and the place that story came from. So if you were to meet Anita on the street, you probably wouldn't even recognize that she was a Native American, but she absolutely comes from that culture. But she lives outside of the reservation. She lives in a beautiful home. We were able to interview her in her beautiful home in Billings. She comes from a very different economic place, a different cultural place than the stories that she's sharing with us. So when you think about the person who's sharing these stories, there's all kinds of their own personal experiences that are coming to bear. So this quote that we took from Lynn Abrams' book was really telling in the way we were looking at some of these. The oral history interview is a complex historical document that contains many layers of meaning and is itself embedded within wider social forces. And Anita sort of expresses that idea. She's also a woman. So all of these social forces that are coming to bear on Anita's story, it doesn't make her story any less valid or important. It's incredibly important, and we're grateful for it. But it's also the way we have to kind of think about oral histories as we're working with them, as we're integrating them into the broader work that we do. And this quote also sort of speaks to this. Now we get to introduce Adam's grandfather, the wonderful Adam Singer, who was delightful in his interview. Oral histories are not static recollections of the past, but memories reworked in the context of the respondent's own experiences. So every person who's telling their story is telling their story. They're telling their story that's filtered through their own experiences in their life, even though it might be a past story. Oftentimes oral histories are their own personal stories, like Bertie was reminiscing about her childhood on the reservation. But many of those stories, Rabbit's story for instance, are passed down. Rabbit did not directly experience the story he told. His parents or grandparents didn't directly experience that. That's a story that comes from many generations past, but it's still there. And that's something we have to take into consideration when working with oral histories. That gives it its richness and its expression of that person's individuality, but it is a removal from that original experience as well. And this one, I think, personally for me, is really significant.